In the warm, busy town of Nsukka, love stories were common, but none captured hearts like Chijioke and Ijeoma's. Chijioke was known as a hard-working young man with big dreams, but when he met Ijeoma, everything about his life seemed to fall into place. She wasn't just beautiful, though her smile could light up a room. It was her heart that truly stood out. She was kind to strangers, gentle with children, and full of big dreams of helping her community. Her strength was quiet but steady, and Chijioke admired that deeply. From the start, their connection felt different. They laughed together, shared ideas, and supported each other's hopes. When he spoke of his future, he always said we instead of I. He introduced her to everyone with pride in his eyes, as if to say, "Look at the woman I get to love." Their friends would smile and whisper, "They're perfect together." People in the neighborhood would watch them walk hand in hand and feel inspired by the simple, strong bond they shared. Chijioke chose Ijeoma with pride, not out of pressure or tradition, but because his heart knew she was special. To him, she was a partner, a dreamer, a woman with fire in her soul, and in those early days, it truly seemed like their love could weather anything. The day of their traditional wedding felt like a dream. The sun shone brightly over Nsukka, and the air was full of music, laughter, and the sweet smell of food. Friends and family came from near and far, dressed in colorful clothes, dancing and singing in celebration of love. It was more than just a wedding. It was a moment of honor, of tradition, of two families becoming one. Chijioke stood proudly, surrounded by elders, uncles, and his father, ready to take the next step. Ijeoma looked radiant in her coral beads and wrapper, her smile wide, but her eyes watery with emotion. She had waited for this moment, with hope in her heart. She wasn't just marrying the man she loved, she was stepping into a future she believed in with all her soul. When it came time for Chijioke to speak his vows, everyone fell silent. In front of the elders, before the spirits of their ancestors, he held her hand and made promises that touched everyone's hearts. "I will stand by you in all seasons," he said, his voice strong. "In joy and in sorrow, in plenty and in little. I will protect your heart and honor your voice. You will never walk alone." Ijeoma's tears flowed freely then, not from sadness, but from deep joy. She believed every word he said. She believed that love, respect, and true partnership would be the foundation of their home. The elders nodded in approval. Her mother held her chest, full of pride. The women ululated with joy, while the men clapped in agreement. It was a perfect moment. She looked at Chijioke and saw not just her husband, but her teammate, her friend, her person. In that sacred gathering, everything felt right. It felt like forever had begun. At first, Ijeoma didn't notice anything was wrong. Life after the wedding moved fast. New home, new routines, and small adjustments. She woke up every morning ready to love, ready to support Chijioke, just like she always had. She cooked his favorite meals, listened to his stories, encouraged his dreams. She believed they were still walking hand in hand like they always did. But slowly, things began to change. Chijioke's tone became different, less warm, less kind. He didn't smile the same way when he looked at her. One evening, when she shared an idea about starting a small reading club for girls in the neighborhood, he laughed and said, "You? Teaching leadership? Who's going to take that seriously?" She laughed it off too, trying not to take it to heart. But something inside her felt small. Then came the small jabs. "This stew is too salty. Why do you always talk so much? You're not as funny as you think." At first, she thought maybe he was just tired from work. She made excuses for him in her mind, believing the man who once looked at her like magic couldn't mean to hurt her. But the coldness didn't go away. It got worse. He would roll his eyes when she tried to share something that excited her. He would cut her off mid-sentence or walk away while she was talking. And when she asked, "Did I do something wrong?" he would shrug and say, "You're just too sensitive." Ijeoma started doubting herself. She would cook with extra care, hoping he'd praise her like he used to. She would hold back her opinions, trying not to say the wrong thing. She kept trying to be the same loving, supportive wife, but nothing seemed to please him anymore. And that was the part that hurt the most. She hadn't changed. She was still the same woman who had stood before the elders with tears in her eyes, believing in their love. Still the woman who had chosen him with her whole heart. She stayed quiet most days, hoping it was just a phase, hoping the warmth would come back. But deep down, something was beginning to break. A quiet, aching crack in her heart that only she could feel. That night started like any other. Ijeoma had made dinner, spiced jollof rice, fried plantains, and grilled chicken, just the way Chijioke used to love it. She placed the plates on the table, hoping maybe today he'd smile, say thank you, or even talk to her like he used to. She missed him, missed the laughter, the gentle teasing, the way they used to talk about everything and nothing. But he came to the table already frowning, barely glanced at the food, and started picking at it like it annoyed him. She tried to stay calm, to keep the peace. "How was work?" she asked softly. He sighed loudly. "Fine." The silence that followed was heavy. She reached for a bit of lightness, saying, "Remember when we first made jollof together? You added too much pepper and blamed me." She smiled at the memory, but he didn't. Instead, he dropped his fork and looked at her with a sharpness that stung. "You're not the woman I married," he said flatly. The words hit her like a slap. Her hand froze mid-air. For a second, she couldn't breathe. "What?" she whispered, hoping she'd misheard. "You've changed," he continued, with a coldness she didn't recognize. "You're always serious, always talking about some new idea. It's like living with a stranger." Ijeoma stared at him, completely stunned. Her chest felt tight. Her eyes burned, but she held back the tears. Because in that moment, all she could think was, "I haven't changed. You have." She was still the same woman who cheered for him, who made sure his clothes were clean and ironed, who asked about his dreams and stayed up late to listen. The same woman who once stood before the elders, full of hope and love. She hadn't stopped loving, hadn't stopped trying. What changed was the way he looked at her, the way he no longer saw her worth, the way he now saw her strength as a threat, her opinions as a burden, her voice as too much. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but her throat felt tight. So instead, she sat in silence, replaying those words over and over. "You're not the woman I married." And somewhere deep inside, something in her heart quietly cracked. Because that night, Ijeoma realized love alone wasn't enough. Not if it meant constantly shrinking herself, just to be accepted by the man who once chose her with pride. After that painful dinner, Ijeoma couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the man beside her, the man who once held her hand like it was his lifeline, now turning his back to her in silence. Her heart was tired, her mind was full, but for the first time in a long time, she started asking herself the hard questions. What really changed? She looked back at the months they had spent together. She thought of how excited she was to grow, not just in love, but in purpose. She remembered the books she read, the leadership class she wanted to join, the small business ideas she had shared with him. Each time she brought something up, he would dismiss it or make her feel foolish for dreaming. It started to make sense now. He wasn't uncomfortable because she had changed. He was uncomfortable because she was growing, and he wasn't. She realized something heavy. Her growth made him feel small. Every time she stood tall, spoke with confidence, or showed ambition, it mirrored the parts of himself he wasn't ready to face. He saw her strength not as something to celebrate, but as something that threatened his place beside her. He didn't want a woman who shined too bright. He wanted someone who stayed small enough to make him feel big. But Ijeoma wasn't meant to stay small. She was born to rise, and she was rising. Slowly, she started seeing things clearly. It wasn't her voice that was too loud. It was his pride that was too fragile. It wasn't her dreams that were the problem. It was his fear of being left behind. The more she tried to dim her light to keep the peace, the more lost she became in the shadows. And she knew she couldn't keep doing that, not if she wanted to recognize herself again. That realization brought both pain and peace. Pain, because she had loved him deeply. Peace, because she now knew it wasn't her fault. She didn't break their love by growing. He broke it by refusing to grow with her. Ijeoma sat with that truth for days, quietly observing how he moved around her like a stranger, how he didn't notice her silence, how he didn't ask how she was feeling. And with every passing moment, She began to reclaim the pieces of herself that she had tucked away just to make him comfortable. She didn't know what the next step would look like yet, but one thing was certain: she would never shrink again. Not for love, not for anyone. The changes became harder to ignore. Chijioke stopped coming home early. At first, he said it was work. Then it became late nights with friends. Sometimes he didn't even bother to explain. He just walked in hours after dinner, barely speaking to Ijeoma before going straight to bed. She would wait up, food cold on the table, heart heavy with worry, but he didn't seem to notice or care. Her birthday came, and he forgot. Not just the cake or a gift, he didn't even say the words. That morning, she had waited, thinking maybe he was planning a surprise. But the day passed in silence. No message, no smile, not even a happy birthday. She had never felt so invisible in her own home. She cried in the bathroom that night, quietly, not wanting him to hear. And when he asked later why her eyes were red, she simply said, "I'm just tired." But the worst part wasn't the silence, it was the disrespect. One evening, they were out with some of his friends. Ijeoma was sharing an idea she had for a community center, a place where girls could learn, create, and build confidence. She spoke with passion, her eyes bright, but in the middle of her words, Chijioke laughed and said, "Here she goes again, our madam too educated, always talking like she's a professor." His friends laughed along, not realizing the hurt in her eyes. Ijeoma felt the sting deep in her chest. She smiled politely, swallowed her pain, and went quiet for the rest of the night. She never argued with him. She never shouted back. She didn't throw his words in his face or try to win any fight. She just endured it, quietly, patiently, hoping he would remember the woman he once chose with pride, hoping he would see how much she was holding together on her own, hoping he would love her again. But love shouldn't feel like begging. And one morning, as she stood in front of the mirror brushing her hair, she caught her own reflection and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes looked tired, her shoulders slumped, her spirit dim, and it hit her like a wave. This is not the life I promised myself. That was her breaking point. Not a loud explosion, not a dramatic fight, just a quiet moment of truth, a decision forming in her heart. She had given him time, patience, kindness, and every chance to meet her where she stood. But he chose to walk away from the love they built, step by step, word by word. And now she was ready to walk too, not in anger, not in hate, but in strength, because enough was enough. The house was quiet that morning. No shouting, no slammed doors, just silence. Ijeoma moved softly, folding her clothes one by one, placing them gently into her bag. She didn't rush. She wasn't angry. She had cried all her tears already. This was not a moment of weakness. This was a moment of power. She had made her decision days ago, but today felt like the right day to go. She waited for him to leave for work, as he always did, without a word, without looking her in the eye. Once the door closed behind him, she stood still for a moment and took a deep breath. Then she began. She packed only what she needed: her clothes, a few books, her journal, her mother's wrapper. Every item held a memory, but she chose only what would carry her forward, not what would keep her stuck. She left behind the wedding album, left behind the framed vows, left behind the pieces of a love that had faded, piece by piece. There was no note. She didn't need to explain. He had heard her voice less and less because he stopped listening. He had seen the light leave her eyes and still didn't ask why. She had tried again and again to fix something that wasn't broken by her hands alone, and now she was done trying. As she zipped her bag, her hands didn't shake, her heart didn't race. Instead, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Not because it didn't hurt, but because deep down, she knew she was doing the right thing. She walked through the house slowly, touching the walls one last time, letting the memories pass through her like a soft wind. The laughter they once shared in the kitchen, the long talks they used to have on the balcony, the promises that once filled this home with hope. She honored all of it in her heart. And then she let it go. When she stepped outside, the sun was rising. The sky was soft with color. She lifted her head, took a deep breath, and kept walking. No drama, no goodbye speech, just dignity. People might wonder why she left without a fight, but they would never understand that walking away in silence takes more strength than staying and losing yourself bit by bit. Ijeoma didn't leave because she gave up on love. She left because she remembered her worth, because she realized that a love that makes you small is not love at all. And as she walked toward her new beginning, she knew she wasn't running away from something. She was finally walking back to herself. Ijeoma, didn't just move on. She rose. After leaving, she went to Onitsha, a place that had always felt like home. She stayed with her cousin at first, unsure of what the future held, but certain of one thing: she was not going to live a small life anymore. No more shrinking, no more silence. She was ready to become everything she had once been told was too much. One morning, she sat by the window watching a group of girls walking to school. They laughed loudly, swinging their bags, full of life. That's when the idea came to her. Not just a school, but a space. A safe, bold, beautiful space where young girls could learn more than just reading and writing. A place where they could learn to lead, to speak, to be proud of their voices, their culture, their dreams. With no money but a heart full of purpose, Ijeoma started small. Just a few girls in her aunt's backyard. They learned how to speak in front of others, how to tell their stories, how to dance in celebration of their identity. Word spread fast. More girls came. Then parents started asking if their daughters could join too. She called it Ada Mema, which means precious daughter. She taught art, poetry, storytelling, and leadership. She taught girls how to walk with their heads high, how to believe in themselves even when the world tried to make them doubt. She taught them that they didn't have to be quiet to be loved, that their dreams were not too big, that their light didn't need permission to shine. Years passed, and Ada Emema grew. Newspapers wrote about it. Local leaders came to visit. NGOs reached out to support. But most importantly, the girls who had once walked in shy and unsure were now speaking on stages, starting small businesses, leading community projects. Ijeoma had given them more than lessons. She had given them permission to be fully themselves. And through it all, Ijeoma never changed. She was still the woman with fire in her voice and softness in her heart. Still the woman who once stood before elders, full of hope. Still the woman who had dared to dream in a marriage that tried to silence her. The only difference now? The world finally saw her. People began to say, "She's such a powerful woman." But Ijeoma would smile gently, because deep down, she knew she had always been this woman. Even when she was ignored, even when she was told she was too much, she had never stopped being her true self. She didn't become someone new, she simply became someone seen. It was a quiet Sunday evening when Chijioke turned on the TV. He wasn't really watching, just flipping through channels, half listening, half bored. But then he saw her, Ijeoma. She stood on a grand stage, dressed in a beautiful blue dress that shimmered under the lights. Her smile was calm, her eyes full of strength. The announcer's voice echoed, "And this year's Humanitarian Impact Award goes to Ijeoma Okeke, founder of Ada Emma Cultural School." The audience clapped. People stood. Cameras flashed. Chijioke froze. He leaned forward slowly, staring at the screen like it was a dream. But it wasn't. It was real. That was her, his ex-wife, the same woman he used to come home to, the same woman whose ideas he once mocked, now standing before the world, celebrated, admired, powerful. His friend, who had been sitting next to him on the couch, looked over and noticed his expression. "You okay?" he asked. Chijioke didn't take his eyes off the screen. That's my ex-wife," he said quietly. The friend smiled, almost with pride. "Wow, you left a queen." Those words hit harder than he expected. He didn't respond, just watched as she held the microphone and began her speech. Ijeoma spoke clearly and with heart. She talked about young girls, about giving them wings, about helping them find their voice. She thanked her community, her students, her mentors, but not once did she mention pain, or the past, or the people who doubted her. She had moved on with grace, with power. Chijioke sat in silence. Memories came flooding back. The first time he met her in Nsukka, how she laughed with her whole chest, how she dreamed so big, how he had once loved that light in her, but later tried to dim it. He remembered the fights, the cold silence, the night he told her, "You're not the woman I married." But now he saw it clearly. She hadn't changed. She had always been that woman, driven, kind, full of vision. The only difference was, back then, he didn't know how to love someone like her. He wanted her small, quiet, easy, but that's not who she was meant to be. Now the world saw what he couldn't, and she wasn't bitter. She wasn't angry. She had simply outgrown the space where she wasn't loved right. Chijioke sat back, feeling a strange mix of pride and regret. He whispered again, more to himself this time. She really was a queen, and for the first time, he truly understood. He didn't lose her because she changed. He lost her because he didn't. The hall was filled with people, leaders, students, mothers, daughters, all waiting to hear from the woman who had inspired so many. Ijeoma stood on stage with quiet confidence, holding the award in her hand. The lights above her were bright, but she was brighter. There was something unshakable about her presence, like a flame that had survived every storm and now burned even stronger. When she stepped up to the microphone, the room fell silent. She took a breath, smiled, and began. "There was a time," she said, "when I thought I had to become smaller to be loved, softer, quieter, less me. But the truth is, I didn't change. I simply stopped shrinking to be loved." There was a pause. The words hung in the air like truth finally spoken out loud. She continued, her voice steady, her heart wide open. "If someone can't recognize your light, don't dim it. Don't fold yourself just to fit into their shadow. Shine louder, shine without apology, because love that requires you to disappear is not love, it's control." People started to clap, softly at first, then louder, until the entire room rose to its feet. Women wiped away tears. Young girls held their chests, feeling seen. Elder women nodded, proud. Ijeoma's words weren't just a speech. They were a mirror, a reminder, a revolution wrapped in honesty. She ended simply, "Stay true to who you are. That's your power. That's your freedom." And with that, she stepped back from the mic, and the applause didn't stop. In that moment, Ijeoma wasn't just one woman. She was every woman who had ever been told to dim her light and chose instead to shine.